Hey everyone. First of all, let me apologize for being so late with feedback this time around. I've been sick with the flu for the last almost week, and I've just been laid up in bed, so I'm finally getting back to it this morning. Um, so again, please bear with me. I apologize for lateness. Also, I'm trying to play catch up, so I'm being a bit more brief with feedback than I like to be. If you have any questions about the score you got or any of the comments that I made, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm more than happy to explain in more detail. But again, I'm just trying to catch up a little bit. I wanted to make a few comments about our first discussion. We all did a very good job, I think, of being collegial with one another, especially on issues that could be a bit touchy and controversial. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Oñate statue and some of the comments that we made around that in just a second. But first, I wanted to offer an extra credit opportunity. So for up to 25 points extra credit, please just respond to this video. I'm going to post it as an announcement and also as a post on the discussion board for this first discussion. Um, and what I want you to do is propose an addition to the Oñate statue that would make it acceptable to both sides, or at least would try to make it more acceptable to both sides. And that doesn't mean tearing it down, but it means adding to. Or, I mean, you can pitch it however you want to do it. But I wanted us to kind of think about how can we make our monuments in public show multiple perspectives on the past. Because I think that's kind of the core issue or the core problem that we're talking about with things like the Oñate statues or even the Fiesta in Santa Fe, is that they tend to present one side of the story. So is there a way, and what can you think of proposing that would present both sides of the story, that would give us a more complex and nuanced picture of the past in the form of a monument? So make your proposal, just write a paragraph in response to the video for up to 25 points extra credit. Okay, so there's the extra credit opportunity. In terms of the just the format of our discussions, I didn't say much about the follow-up questions and so on this time around because I'm late and I wasn't present in the discussion very well to kind of help us along with that. But please remember that you need to first post a question, an open-ended question that isn't counterfactual. And then in your first response post to someone else's question, you write the response, you have at least one specific cited piece of evidence to support your ideas, and then you ask a follow-up question at the end of that first response. Then you go and respond to, you can either respond to someone else's initial question, or you can respond to someone's follow-up question on your own post, however you want to do that, just as long as you post one question and two responses. And then in those two responses, one of them needs to ask a follow-up. So I hope that makes sense. If not, please ask, let me know. Also, when I mention you need to cite evidence, I mean you need to cite the source that you're getting the evidence from. You know, in a lot of cases that will be the mile, but also we read Garner this week. We read the article about remembering and dismembering by Andy Trujillo, not Andy Trujillo, but Trujillo. You know, you can cite any of those things, you can cite the videos, but you need to, in parentheses, put the source that you're taking your information from, and you need to cite a specific bit of information, not just make a kind of general reference or referral back to the video. You said, yeah, I really liked the video, it talked about this, and here's my answer. But instead, the evidence needs to directly support your answer. It needs to be evidence to show why you're answering in the way that you are. So again, keep that in mind as we go forward. A couple of comments now, and I'm going to try to keep this somewhat brief, although I'm already gone longer than I sometimes like to. In the Garner article, something I wanted to emphasize is that Garner does argue that religious conflict wasn't the primary reason for the Pueblo Revolt. Part of the reason that he does that is that he's saying, and I think he makes a pretty good case for the idea that past historians have approached the Pueblo Revolt too simplistically. They've seen 17th century New Mexico as a place with very simple human relationships, And of course, that wasn't the case. Right off the bat, he argues that 17th century New Mexico was a complicated place, a difficult place to live in a lot of ways. People had complex allegiances. Pueblos allied with Spaniards, with different groups among Spaniards. So again, he points out it's not just Spaniards versus Pueblos, but we have Franciscans, we have governors, we have encomenderos, we have settlers. Then we have the people, the mestizos, that were born of unions between usually Spanish men and Pueblo women that also form part of the New Mexico colony in the 17th century. So again, it's not a simple place. It's not somewhere where there's just one thing that all of a sudden created a rebellion. I think he makes a pretty good case for those complexities keeping people at bay at least for 80 years, and then drought and famine coming together to cause nativism, as he calls it, or religious persecution to once again spike in the 1670s, and then leading to a revolt in 1680. But again, he says there are a lot more factors at play. That does not mean, however, and here's the part I really wanted to emphasize, that does not mean that he's saying religious conflict had nothing to do with it. Of course it did. And he talks about it throughout the article. But he's saying it wasn't just that there was a religious conflict and all of a sudden there's a revolt. That doesn't really explain why it took 80 years for that to happen. So again, he shows us a much more complex place, a place that makes a lot more sense based on what we know of how humans interact with each other, I think. One thing to take away, I think, from this is that history is always messy. There's never one cause for something that happened in the past, but multiple things coming together. And then finally, a lot of us talked about the Oñate statues, and I already mentioned the extra credit opportunity. I think something that we should keep in mind is that at issue with these statues is a kind of fine line between being celebratory, celebrating figures from the past, and whitewashing their memory, and memorializing them in a more complex way. And so again, we know that the past is complicated. But if we just have a nice, fancy, shiny statue of Juan de Oñate, that message sort of says, well, we're honoring this person. We see him as heroic and someone worthy of memory. It doesn't give us the complex sides of the story that have often been erased. And I think that the Friends of Acoma that cut off the foot, part of what they're doing in a very public way is reasserting their perspective on the past, a perspective that has been erased for 400 years. So it's not as simple as saying it was 400 years ago, forget about it, the way that the grounds administrator of that site in Alcalde said, but instead thinking, wait a minute, there's more at stake here. So that's why I thought the question of trying to come up with a memorial that honors both sides is sort of an interesting thing to think about. Final thought, I just wanted to bring up something that this has made me think of. I've been listening to the Hidden Brain podcast from NPR. It's a social science research podcast, but it's interesting. It's not just like boring, this was the paper kind of thing. I highly recommend it. One of the more recent podcasts, though, talked about memorial to, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but the man who is seen as the father of gynecology. But something that's forgotten, there are statues to him in South Carolina and New York. Something that's forgotten in the story, though, is that he experimented on enslaved African American women prior to the Civil War in order to kind of make his breakthroughs and understand women's medicine. So he did make some important breakthroughs. It's important to remember him. But also there are these 3 slave women that were integral to his experiments and his efforts. But they didn't have a voice. They weren't able to consent to participate. They endured a lot of pain in those experiments for medicine and so on. But again, their part of the story tends to be forgotten. And the interview and the podcast is with a woman who teaches medicine and the history of medicine at a university in the South, I believe, if I'm remembering right. You should go look it up and listen to get all the details. But the host asked her if she thinks his statue should be removed. And she said, if you would have asked me that a year ago, I would have said yes. But she had an experience that changed her mind. So she went to Liverpool in England, and she was taking a tour of slavery there because Liverpool was one of the hubs of the transatlantic slave trade while that was at its height um, in the 1800s. And the man that was giving the tour was an elderly black man, and he asked the people on the tour when they came to this building. It had a kind of part of the tile was a picture of Poseidon, and beneath him were two black children in chains, kind of harkening back to this history of Liverpool being the hub of the slave trade. And he asked them if they thought that that part of the building should be removed or tiled over or whatever. And they gave their answers, and he said, "I don't think so. I think it needs to stay there to remind us of what this place was, that this place has a legacy of being home to the slave trade." So going back to the statue then, the problem that she saw with the statue to just the man, the father of gynecology, is that it leaves out more than half of the story. It leaves out the women who were experimented on. And so her idea was maybe to add either just a plaque or something that explains their role in his development of knowledge, his experimentation, or add other statues of those women as well to go along with it to tell the story. So that was kind of her proposal, her thought in that case. And it's really gotten me thinking about things like the Oñate statues, about the way that Fiesta in Santa Fe is presented and portrayed, or at least the role of De Vargas in the quote-unquote bloodless reconquest there. So I will leave it at that. This is a longer video than I like to leave you with normally, but again, had a few important things to say. Again, I apologize that I was sick for so long. I'm back to it now. Please let me know, as always, if you have any questions or concerns, and I look forward